Again, and welcome back. Here we are to start a brand new project with React. And here's kind of a sample of what the project might look like when we're done. It's going to use the public API that gets the weather data. And so the idea is you would type in a zip code here, 94010, and then you can hit submit, and it'll give you the weather data, right? So it says, 291 degrees. That's actually in Kelvin, right? And so you can also, in our app, you'll be able to select the unit that you want to use. So I could say, let's do metric, and it'll tell me 18.25 Celsius or imperial 64 degrees, right? And you can type in any zip code. I don't know, I think is that New York? So 74 degrees, kind of nice over there, right? So, so the first part will be to set up the app, right? And then also to set up the user interface and the form here. And React has a pattern that we follow when we create form elements and forms in React, okay? And so that's what I'd like to talk about now. And we'll also review state and props again, because that's going to be part of this pattern. Okay, so why don't we get started? I'm going to go find a folder here where I can work, and I think I'm going to put this in my class. I don't have a class 3 folder. Let's make a class 3 folder, right? Class 3, and then I'll put my project here. So maybe let me get the terminal here. And I'm going to cd over to class 3 there. Okay, and let's create a brand new React app. So I'm going to say npx create React app, and then I'll follow it with the name of the app. So I'll call it weather. Just call it weather app. How about that, right? And then it'll take a moment to install all of the dependencies. So you can see there's a couple things going on while that's working. I'll point out a couple things that's going on in this app. Let me zoom in on it a little bit here so we can see it up close. And you'll notice that if I select one of the radio buttons, it also chooses the item on the menu here, right? And that's going to be kind of a thing that we get for free due to the pattern that we use. Normally, when you're creating form elements, the form element is kind of independent, and you can select or do anything you want with it. And then you only get the value or figure out which item is selected or what the current value is that has been input at the moment that you want to use it. So for example, like in a standard way of doing this, these would not be connected in any way. And I would only be concerned with the values, or I would only go get the values when I click the submit button, right? In React, we're going to turn that around, and we're going to have some variables held on state that hold the values that were currently input. So for example, the zip code will be held on a variable. The value that you input here will be on a variable, and which one of these radio buttons selected is going to be on a variable. And so when I click the submit button, I don't actually have to go and fetch that information. It'll already be there. Okay, great. So now we got that out of the way. We got our project created here. Let's cd into our project and start it. So I'm going to do yarn start. There we go, and here's our new project here. Okay, great. So let's open up the folder where we're working. We'll open this in VS Code. We'll go to the source directory here. And let me make the text like a little bit bigger there. And I'm going to go to the app component, and like we did before, I'm just going to delete everything except for that div, okay, because maybe I need the div. And then I can get rid of this import statement at the top too. Okay, so now there's our app. It's working, but it's just blank, right? So now let's make a component. And the idea here is I'm going to have a component that displays the weather. And it's good for us to break our apps into components because that gives us kind of building blocks, and it makes our apps modular, makes it easier to reason about the code that's there because we can look at a specific component to examine how it works. And it's not cluttered with all the code, you know, from other components, right? So let's do that. I'm going to start by making a brand new component, and I'm going to call it weather.js, right? So here's the weather.js component. And we'll start by importing state. So I'll get use state from React. And then we'll get a function, and we'll name it after our component. And I don't think this component's going to need any props, but if it did, we could add that props variable in there. And then a component should always return something. So let's just return a div for now. It should always return some JSX. And then at the bottom, we should export our component. And there we go. Ooh. Okay, so we got the weather component. Let's import our weather component into app. So I'll switch to app. I'll choose, import weather from /weather. Okay, and then we can display our weather component here. So let's put the weather component there. And we still don't see anything because this doesn't display anything yet, right? But there we go, we're all started. So now that we've got the weather component, let's just set up the form and talk about how React works with forms. So I'm going to put a form element here, and inside my form, I'm going to just start with an input. And if I was to look at this, you can see it's hard to see there, but that's just the input that we have, right? That's the only thing we have. And then maybe I also need a button, like a submit button, So I'll put submit on there, right? Okay. And actually, before we start with state and getting into that use state stuff, let's actually add a style sheet really quick, because it'll be kind of hard to see this on the screen. These buttons are and the input is so small. Why don't we just add a quick style sheet and put a couple styles, and then we'll continue with the actual code. So I'm going to make I'm going to follow the same pattern we used before. I'm going to make a new file here called weather.css. It'll have the same name as my component. And then I'll add a class for weather, right? So let's put the weather class on our div here. Class name equals weather, right? So I got the weather class name there. And then I have a structure here. So I've got class name weather, form, input, and button. Okay, so that means that I can use any of the CSS selectors to get to those elements. So if I want to get to the form, I can do child form. And if I want to get to the input, I can say form and then do child input like this. And if I want to get to the button, I can do the button too. So I can do this one as button, right? So that would be a style. And there's a few other selectors you could use for this, and you could put class names on these elements if you wanted to. You could also, as soon as we give them attributes, we could use the attribute as a selector. So CSS is pretty flexible, right? But I'm going to just do it this way for now. So maybe the form and weather don't need any styles yet, but maybe we'll come back to those. But maybe the input here, let's give it a little bit of padding, right? So I'm going to give it a padding of like 1 rem, a font size of 1 rem, and oh yeah, we got to import our style sheet too. So we've got the style sheet, it's not doing anything until we import it. So I'm going to go in here and choose import, or write import weather.css, right? Let's see. Oh, there we go. Now the text is looking pretty big, and I got some space around it, so that's kind of nice, right? That button looks pretty small, so let's do the same thing here. We'll give the button, oh, that's looking pretty good there, right? Okay. Maybe these guys need a border too, so I'll say border of 1 pixel solid. Maybe I'll paste this down here. We could combine these. These have the same style, so actually we can combine those, but I'll leave them separate for now. Oh, there we go. That's not looking too bad. There's a little bit, for some reason, the input always has a little bit of margin, right? So I'm going to take the margin off of this, right? Margin of 0. And then maybe the button has a tiny bit of margin too. I should really combine those. Oh, now there we go. I should really combine these because they're all the same rules, right? Okay, great. So now we got that going on. Let's, maybe this button right here, let's give it a background color. So this is actually where it's going to be different. Let's say background color is going to be, let's do 333, and then let's do the foreground color of EEE. I don't know, right? That doesn't look too bad, right? And maybe let's round the corners. So I kind of like that, but I want to round the corners here, and then round these 2 corners on the button. So for the weather object, maybe we'll say, or for the weather, the input right here, we'll say you're going to have a border radius, and this is the upper left corner, upper right corner, lower right corner, lower left corner. So think, start in the upper left and go around clockwise. So this corner, I want it to be 0.5 rems. The next corner will be 0. The lower right will be 0, and now the lower left is going to be 0.5 rem also. So that rounds these 2 corners and leaves these square. So now let's do the same thing, but the right corners on the other button. So maybe down here we'll say border radius, upper left is 0, upper right is 0.5 rem, lower right is 0.5 rem, lower left is 0. Oh, there we go. So that's looking pretty good. Now, let's do one more thing, right? This is kind of clunky, like stuffed way at the top of the page there. It'd be nice if it was like right in the middle. So let's do that. In order to do that, we need to set some styles on the body in HTML. So I'm going to go to this index CSS, because this is where we're kind of styling the body already. So I'm going to go in here and add a new rule for the body tag, comma, and the HTML tag. So this means both of these elements get the same style. And I'm going to set this to height of 100%. Okay? So height of 100%. So that'll make the body in HTML take up 100% of the page. Now we have to also make the app take up 100% of the page. So I'm going to go to app CSS. And there's a bunch of other stuff in here. I'm going to just get rid of all these guys except for that first rule right here. Right? So for app, I'm going to say you're going to be height 100%. Okay? So now we're kind of still in the upper left corner. We got to do one more thing, right? So the weather component right here, it also needs to be height 100%. Okay? So what that means now is that if I inspect here and I look at the body, you can see the blue area takes up the entire page. right? If I don't have that on index, like I take this out for some reason, right? When I refresh here, you can see the body, the blue area only is as tall as the content, right? So I need this to be as tall as the page, right? And then the next thing is the div inside there should also take up the height of the page there, right? Yeah, the body takes up the height of the page. Oh yeah, my div here, this div root needs to take up the height of the page, so I have a problem, right? So let's go fix that, right? So where is root? We got to find that. I guess maybe I can put that, it's ID root. So I'm going to go into index CSS, and then we'll do ID root. Actually, we're just going to do this. Why don't we just do it here, root there, okay? Right, so we'll just say body, HTML, and root. Remember the hashtag because it's an ID is going to be height 100%. So I've got, root is 100%, app is 100%, weather is 100%. Everybody takes up the full height of the page. So now that we've done that, we can use this to move the weather element into the center of the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to app CSS and declare the element that's app here. I'm going to give it display flex, and then I'm going to say justify content center and align items center. Wait, I got this in the middle here, but not vertically. Let's check. So I'm going to go inspect again and see what we have. So I've got app here, and then I've got weather. Oh, I made a mistake. Maybe I set weather to height 100%, but actually I don't want that one. I don't want height 100%. Oops, my mistake. There we go. There we go, right in the middle. Okay, so cool. That gave us a good starting place, right? So we got our form, we got our submit button. Let's actually add one more thing here, and then we'll continue in the next video, right? So I like the form, but it would be really nice if it had some placeholder text that said like enter zip code here or something, right? Okay, so to do that, there's a built-in attribute, so that's an easy one to solve. I'll go to the weather component here, find the input, and in here I'm going to add an attribute called placeholder, right? And so placeholder is a string that is displayed when nothing has been entered. So I'll say enter zip code. How about that, right? And then we see enter zip code there. So now that looks like a pretty good form. We'll add some radio buttons and maybe a select menu later. But for right now, we'll hold on this, okay? So thanks for watching. That gave us a good starting place. And then in the next video, we'll start writing some code and to handle the input, okay?